this last clip on general layout characteristics, what I want to do is examine what we have and kind of get it to where we need to be. First thing I want to do is identify problems. So if we look at the map, we see a couple things that are a little bit problematic. First of all, what we have is our graticule. You can see that the graticule is here and here, and that the label runs across our frame line and in fact makes it virtually impossible to read. The same is true down here at the bottom. So that's a bit of a problem. We also have some conflicts between elements. In other words, here's our parallel line and the word miles runs across it, and because they're both the same color, that makes it very difficult to see. The same is true of our legend and the frame of our inset. So we've got a number of things that we've got to deal with here. The first thing I want to suggest is that when we look at our main map element, what we see is that Florida is kind of floating out here, and it's okay to have a state or a enumeration unit that sits by itself, but oftentimes we want to add some context in a more subtle way. The other thing that I would suggest in terms of the general map is that Florida exists within a water body, and if we're going to contextualize it with the rest of the country, we might want to think about having our frame have a cerulean or a blue background. So let's first deal with these two elements. And one way that I'm going to do that is by adding a secondary layer, which is the entire country's boundary. So I'm going to drag the US states generalized up from our other data frame into the main data frame. And then because I want it to fall to the background, we already have Florida forward. In other words, it has a color that's kind of a characteristic of a forward color, meaning this tan color. But for the states, what I'm going to do is I'm going to change their color to a somewhat light gray, and I'm going to give their boundary a only slightly darker gray. Now once we do that, what you're going to see is that in fact that falls to the background. And we always talk about fore, middle, and background in maps or in graphic layout. And so you'll notice already, because the boundary of Florida is black, the gray boundary on the rest of the country allows it to fall backwards. Now the next thing I'm going to do is with our main data frame, I'm going to change the color of its background using properties to a light cyan or a light blue. Either one of those would work. I'm going to choose the light blue and see how that plays. And so now we have a fairly nice layout. In other words, we see the backmost area is the water, the middle ground is the continental boundary, and in the foreground is Florida, in fact the thing where we're interested in. Now the next piece that I want to deal with is this question of our labeling for our graticule going across other information. And in this case, because we've inserted a graticule, we already have what we would call a frame line integrated into it. So what I can now do is on this layers, I'm going to go to its properties, and in fact I'm going to remove this frame line, and you'll see how that improves the layout. Now you'll notice that I still have a frame line. It just simply is incorporated into the rest of the layout. And we can now see, and I'm going to use this zoom tool or layout zoom tool, and I can look at kind of how that's going to look. And we now see that everything kind of lines up okay there. Now let's go back and look at our other areas of what we call conflict in the map. And the first one that I see is this issue of the inset map border going across a meridian. So I want to deal with that in some manner. And the easiest way in this case, the reason it actually works that way, is both that the background of our inset and the background of the main map is of the same color, or we may find out that it's a transparent layer. So I'm going to click on an inset map, again go to properties, and we're going to look at its background, and we're going to see that in fact I want its background to be the same as the other map. That would be one way of doing it, because then we in a sense have similar colors. Now the problem with that is that without the Canadian border, we're actually implying that north of the United States is water. And you have to be careful with your symbology. So what I'm going to do here is actually change our background to white, but then what I need to do is I'm going to leave my border, but I'm going to reduce the gap in the border. And before I do that, I want to apply this so you kind of see what would happen if I didn't do that. You'll notice that the background now is white, but in fact that there's an offset or gap between my frame and that, and it leaves again that conflicting area. So I'm again click on this, go to my properties, and I'm going to change these gaps to 0. And now you'll notice I have a nice clean area here. Now I'm going to move this out of the way a little bit though, and you'll see how nicely that looks in terms of not in conflict with any of the other elements. I can then take my my citation information here, and I'm going to move that up, but the other thing that I'm going to do with it is it's highlighted now, and then I'm going to hold the Shift key down and also select my Inset Map, right click, and I'm going to align them to the left. Now you'll notice that they both in fact align left. They're nice and neatly organized. The next piece that I'm going to do is look at my state boundaries. That's my legend. I'm going to move that and say, all right, is that what I want? Now one of the things that you'll notice, because the way these are laid out, that these two things have slightly different sized palette pieces. And that's something that when we get into dealing with legends we might talk about. But for right now, that's a sufficient legend. But again, I want it to align with the bottom of my inset map. So again, I'm going to click on both of them using the Shift key, and then I'm going to right click and align bottom. And you'll notice now that they have a nice alignment to them. It is important to have these types of alignments working. Now I'm going to take my scale bar and I'm going to move it up so that we have everything kind of working in space there. Now it's important to note what I did up here is I changed my map scale to 1 to 3 million. It is very important that at any time when you produce a scale on a map, the scale is appropriate. In other words, we don't want a scale that says 1 to 2,864,322. That's a nonsensical scale. Scales should either be in a metric gradation, that is in multiples of 10, or in English gradations, which you have to remember that essentially work on the 63-360 rule. Okay, 1 inch is equal to 1 mile. Okay, is 1 to 63-360. And so you want to typically work within multiples of that. Okay, 1 inch to 1 mile, 1 inch to 10 miles, 1 inch to 100 miles, etc. Those are English units and really should be adhered to. All right, now our last piece that I want to deal with in this video is the title. So our title right now is kind of sitting here and it's kind of overlapping with things that I don't want it to. So the first thing I'm going to do, give myself just a little bit more space in this, is move Florida down just a little bit. And so now I have a little bit of gray space up here that allows me to work with my title. The next thing I'm going to do is move that title over, and I am in fact going to center it now. I have the ability to do this. And I'm going to align it to its margins. And in terms of the location, we have it nice in the middle now. And the next thing that I want to do is in its properties, I'm going to go into change symbols and I'm going to edit the symbol, and I'm going to in fact give it a mask. A mask, what we call a halo, gives a little bit of white space around it, and you'll see what that looks like in just a moment. In doing that, you'll notice that the title now has a little bit of this halo around it, and that therefore kind of sets it off from the other map elements. So now we've got each map element in place, each one of them is readable, and our map is in fact appropriate. Now there are lots of things that we could do to change minor layout details, but for right now this is a usable map that doesn't violate any significant problems. Alright, till next time, we will continue with map making and typography.